They called Seawolf Ledge a worthless rock. No chart, no welcome. Just black granite and a house that won't confess. The night the gale found us, my dog put his nose to the hearth and dragged a secret out of stone. A hidden chamber, a dry journal, and a brass key that fit no door I owned. Out here, the ocean never goes quiet. It chooses who gets to hear it. And tonight, something in that storm is answering our light. At the edge of the world, where the Atlantic smashed itself endlessly against black granite, there stood a house that no map cared to mark. It was no more than a crooked silhouette on Seawolf Ledge, a place the locals called Worthless Rock. To Michael Croft, a former Marine who had come north to disappear, it was supposed to be nothing more than a refuge, a place where silence might drown the ghosts that had followed him home from war. But on that night, in the teeth of a November gale, the silence broke. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling salt-stained shutters, clawing at the roof as if trying to pry him out of his solitude. Michael sat by the hearth, the only light a restless fire casting orange scars across the wooden walls. His frame was tall but lean. The bulk of his service years melted away into sinew and bone. The face staring into the flames was rough, prematurely aged, a battlefield carved in flesh. Yet his eyes, clear steel blue, remained alert, never fully off duty. At his feet, the dog stirred. Scout had been part of the inheritance no one else in the Croft family wanted. A 5-year-old German shepherd, silver and white like sea foam, he was too serious for Evan, Michael's greedy cousin. But to Michael, the dog was more than company. He was the only soul who seemed to understand what it meant to stand a watch in silence. That night, Scout rose suddenly, ears sharp against the roar of the storm. He moved to the hearth, nose pressing hard against one of the broad, flat stones that formed its base. A low whine escaped him. He scratched once, claws screeching against the granite. Michael frowned. "Easy, boy. It's just a rock." But Scout didn't stop. He pawed again, more desperate this time, then looked back at his master with eyes burning amber in the firelight. It was not fear. It was urgency. Michael felt the old training flicker awake inside him. Instinct, pattern, signals. In Afghanistan, when a dog froze on a trail, lives were saved because men trusted what animals could sense long before humans could see. He set down the whiskey glass in his hand and crouched beside the hearth, running calloused fingers over the stone. Cold. Solid. Nothing unusual. Then, there, a faint seam. Barely perceptible, but once felt it could not be ignored. A gust slammed the cabin. The fire spat sparks. Scout pressed closer, whining louder now, his body trembling with effort as if to say, "Look, listen, believe me." Michael's pulse quickened. He stood, crossed the room, and returned with an iron bar he used for splitting wood. Sliding the flat edge into the seam, he heaved. At first, nothing happened. Then the hearth groaned, a deep grinding sound that seemed to rise from the bones of the rock itself. The heavy slab tilted upward with reluctant protest, and beneath it yawned darkness, a hollow cavity, not natural but deliberate. The air that rose from it was cool and dry, laced with a metallic tang. Michael angled the firelight closer, his heart hammering. Inside lay a lead-lined box, edges precise, the surface uncorroded despite decades of salt air. Scout sat back on his haunches, silent now, eyes fixed on his master, as if waiting for him to understand. Michael reached down. The metal was cold, heavier than it looked. With effort, he dragged the box out, setting it beside the hearth. For a long moment, he simply stared at it, the storm screaming around him, the fire guttering low. This was no fisherman's chest, no forgotten heirloom. This was something else, something hidden with purpose. And suddenly the phrase from his grandfather's will came back to him, as sharp as a rifle shot through memory. To my grandson Michael, I leave Seawolf Ledge and everything upon it, because he is the only one who understands the value of a silent watch. The storm outside howled louder, as if the sea itself demanded he open the box. Michael set his jaw, reached for the latch, and whispered, "All right, old man. Let's see what you were watching." A latch isn't a door. It's a verdict. I wasn't opening a box. I was clocking in. If he buried this under a fireplace, it wasn't shame. It was triage. Somewhere between the war I left behind and the sea he never stopped listening to, a watch changed wrists. I just didn't know what it would cost yet. Michael Croft had never planned to inherit silence. In his 35 years, silence had always meant danger. The split second before an explosion, the hollow quiet of a battlefield after the shooting stopped, the aching void that followed when men you knew did not answer the roll call. Yet here he was, days after the reading of his grandfather's will, steering a small diesel boat toward a jagged tooth of granite that jutted out of the Atlantic. His only company was the German shepherd, who waited for him on the stern. Scout, the dog his grandfather had left in his care. The trip north had been a blur of asphalt and empty miles. He had driven his old pickup from Virginia to Maine, sleeping in the cab at truck stops, surviving on gas station coffee, and the gnawing thought that he was heading not toward a fortune, but toward a burden. His cousin Evan had made that plain at the will reading, mocking him for accepting what he called a worthless rock and a mangy dog. Evan had taken the houses, the stock portfolio, the shipping shares. Michael had taken the silence. But even as the lawyer's voice droned through the formalities, Michael had felt something stir when Julian Croft's final words were read. "I leave Seawolf Ledge and everything upon it to my grandson Michael, because he is the only one who understands the value of a silent watch." That phrase had struck with the force of a bullet. It was the language of centuries, of long lonely nights in Afghanistan staring into a dark desert, eyes stinging, ears straining, waiting for a threat that might never come but would kill if you missed it. His grandfather should not have known that phrase. And yet, he had written it. That mystery gnawed at Michael as much as grief or duty. He had met Jed, the fisherman, at the weathered pier in Port Clyde. Jed was built like driftwood, gnarled, sun-bleached, stubbornly unbroken. His eyes were a pale grey that seemed to see farther than the horizon. When Michael introduced himself, Jed shook his hand with the grip of a man who had pulled too many nets from too many storms. "Your grandfather," Jed said, tying off the boat without looking at him, "was a man of few words. But he never wasted one. He'd sit out there on that ledge with his dog, staring at the sea like he was waiting for it to confess a secret. Folks thought him strange. I thought him steady. Michael had only nodded. The war had left him wary of words. Beside him, Scout shifted his weight and looked directly into Jed's face. The old fisherman almost smiled. "He's been waiting," Jed murmured. "Every evening he sits at the end of this pier, watching the horizon. Didn't touch food unless I left it right in front of him. Loyal. Too loyal to belong to anyone else." Michael crouched then, palm up. Scout leaned forward, sniffed, and pressed his cold nose into the Marine's hand. The simple gesture carried more weight than the lawyer's entire reading. From that moment, Michael was no longer travelling alone. They took the houses and the shares. I took a rock and a dog who stares through lies. It felt like losing, until the shoreline started whispering back. Men bargain with value, centuries bargain with time. If this ledge needed a pair of eyes at dusk, I had two. and the dog had 4. Seawolf Ledge rose out of the sea like a warning. Dark granite cliffs slick with salt spray. A single wooden house perched near the top, its shutters clinging by rusted hinges. As Michael cut the engine and let the boat drift into the cove his grandfather had marked on the map, he felt the same taut readiness in his body that he had felt on insertions overseas. His pulse slowed, his breath measured. Scout stood at the bow, paws planted, as if leading them onto hostile shore. The cabin smelled of damp and disuse. The windows were clouded, the furniture draped in mildew. When Michael dropped his duffel on the warped floorboards, dust rose like ghosts. For a moment, despair pressed down on him. This was not a refuge, it was a tomb. But then Scout pressed his flank against Michael's leg, steady as stone. The dog's amber eyes seemed to say, "You are not alone. Not anymore." At night, the silence was heavy. Michael would jolt awake on the sagging cot, heart hammering, convinced he had heard the snap of a rifle bolt. Memories flooded him. Helmand Province, 2010. He had been crouched behind a mud wall with 2 Marines barely out of high school. The desert night was so quiet he could hear their shallow breathing. Then came the first crack, then the screaming, then the dust. He had dragged one of them to cover, only to realize the boy was already gone, eyes wide and unblinking at the same stars that now glittered above the Atlantic. He had lived with that silence ever since. It followed him into cities, into family gatherings, into empty apartments where he sat staring at a television he never turned on. Coming here was supposed to be different, but silence has memory, and memory travelled with him. By day, he forced his body into labour. He cleared debris from the porch, rehung shutters, chopped wood, scraped years of salt crust from the windows until weak daylight filtered in. His hands blistered, then calloused. Every nail driven, every board mended was a fight against the ghosts. Scout followed him everywhere. When Michael cursed a stubborn plank, Scout would rest his heavy head on his knee. When panic tightened Michael's chest at the sudden slam of a loose shutter, Scout leaned against him until his breathing steadied. The dog was remarkable. His coat was a storm of grey and white, his frame powerful, yet graceful. He ate little, accepted food without greed, and patrolled the perimeter of the ledge each evening as if it were sacred ground. Michael once watched him stand on the cliff edge for nearly an hour, ears swiveling, eyes fixed on the horizon. It was not idle behaviour. It was a soldier on watch. In the evenings, Michael turned to the sea chest Julian had left behind. Inside were journals, dozens of them, bound in leather, their pages filled with a precise engineer's script. He opened the first expecting ramblings of an old man. Instead, he found charts of tides, sketches of bird migrations, detailed notes on the low hums of the sea at night. His grandfather had not been wasting his exile. He had been listening, recording, waiting. Michael remembered fragments of childhood summers with Julian, the smell of salt and engine oil, the way his grandfather pointed at the horizon and said, "The ocean talks, but most men don't know how to listen." At 7 years old, Michael had only laughed. Now, decades later, the words pressed like a weight against his chest. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Evan's mocking voice replayed in his head. A worthless rock, a shack, and a dog. Yet Michael could not shake the sense that there was more here, something his grandfather had entrusted to him alone. The journals hinted at it. The dog's vigilance confirmed it. And the phrase "silent watch" echoed louder with each passing day. Scout seemed to sense his uncertainty. When Michael lingered too long staring at the sea, the dog would nudge his hand, grounding him. When nightmares threatened to pull him under, Scout's steady breathing beside the cot pulled him back. Their bond deepened until words became unnecessary. They moved as a unit, man and dog, both scarred, both searching for redemption. One night, as the wind howled and rain lashed the windows, Michael sat by the hearth reading. Scout suddenly stirred, ears pricking, gaze fixed on the granite slab beneath the fire. He whined softly, then pawed at the stone. Michael frowned. "Easy, boy." Nothing there, but Scout was insistent, scratching again, his growl low and frustrated. Michael's hand trembled as he set aside the journal. He remembered how combat dogs in Afghanistan had frozen, refusing to move, saving entire squads from hidden IEDs. Their instincts were never wrong. He crouched, pressed his palm against the stone, and felt the faintest give, as if something beneath waited to be found. The silence in the cabin deepened. Scout's amber eyes glowed in the firelight. And Michael understood. This was no ordinary inheritance. His grandfather had left him not just a place of exile, but a post, a secret, a legacy measured not in gold, but in vigilance. He had not come here to disappear. He had come here to take the watch. Silence isn't absence, it's a perimeter. 3 sentries keep it. A dog who freezes, a stone that hides, and a man who knows when not to speak. When all 3 go taut at once, you're not alone. You're outnumbered. The storm outside had passed, but in the cabin, the silence was heavier than thunder. Michael crouched before the hearth, his palm still resting on the cold granite slab. Beneath his hand, he felt not the stubborn solidity of stone, but the faint suggestion of movement, the way a hidden door breathes when someone presses against it. His throat tightened. He had touched plenty of hidden doors in his life, but they were usually rigged with explosives. Scout paced in a tight circle, tail stiff, ears forward. The dog gave a low rumble, not aggressive, not fearful, but urgent, like a comrade insisting, "Pay attention." Michael fetched his crowbar from the sea chest. Its weight was familiar, the heft of iron promising leverage and revelation. He wedged the flattened edge into the seam he could barely see, then leaned his shoulder into it. For a long breath, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan that vibrated through the floorboards, the slab tilted upward. Dust and the stale breath of a sealed chamber rose into the... Cabin Scout thrust his nose forward immediately, inhaling sharply, tail giving a single thump of satisfaction. The space beneath was no bigger than a coffin. Inside, nestled like relics in a tomb, lay a lead-lined box. Its dull grey metal absorbed the firelight, giving nothing back. Michael's pulse quickened. He lowered the crowbar, reached in, and lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked, its weight pressing against his arms with the density of secrets. He set it on the hearthstone. Scout sat beside him, posture straight, gaze fixed as though awaiting an unveiling ceremony. It wasn't a house key. It was a machine's prayer. Grooves for a lock I hadn't seen, weight like a verdict. In my palm, it felt like a relay baton. The old man hadn't run from the world. He'd built a way to keep listening to it. The clasp was simple, a rusted hinge held by a pin. Michael worked it loose with the tip of his knife. The lid lifted with a metallic creak, revealing 2 objects, a journal wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved, and something that gleamed even in the weak light of the fire. It was not a key in any familiar sense. Solid brass, machined with precision, it had a T-shaped handle and a cylindrical shaft cut with interlocking grooves. Michael lifted it, the weight cold and solid in his palm. It looked less like something to open a door and more like a component of some machine. Scout leaned forward and sniffed it, then sat back, eyes steady, as if to say, "Yes, this is what we came for." Michael set the key aside and unwrapped the journal. The oilcloth peeled back, revealing leather dry but intact. He opened it, and the handwriting on the first page froze him in place. My name is Julian Croft. In the year 1973, I was honorably discharged from the United States Navy, where I served as a senior acoustic engineer on the Sound Surveillance System project. Not a recluse, an engineer. Cold War ears under warm water. He learned the sea speaks in miles and undertones, and he carved a chamber inside this rock so those whispers had somewhere to land. If command wanted a weapon, he built a conscience. Michael blinked. He read the lines again, then again. His grandfather had never spoken of the Navy. The family stories had painted him as a stubborn fisherman, an eccentric recluse. But these pages told another story. The journal unfolded like a classified briefing. Julian wrote of his service in SOSUS, the secret underwater listening network designed to track Soviet submarines. He described the language of the ocean, the way low-frequency sounds could travel for hundreds of miles through deep channels. He spoke of the songs of the sea, whales, shifting tectonic plates, the groan of storms transmitted through stone. Michael turned the page, his pulse pounding. The precise diagrams reminded him of field manuals, tidal charts, acoustic signatures, sketches of undersea ridges. Julian's script grew angrier as the story progressed. He wrote of superiors who saw his work not as a shield, but as a sword, a weapon to aim missiles with more accuracy. They cannot see the beauty in listening, Julian had scrawled. They only see the utility in killing. Michael's throat tightened. He could hear the bitterness in those lines, the disillusionment. It was the same corrosion he had felt in Afghanistan, when he realized some missions were not about saving lives, but about political theatre. The entries turned personal. Julian wrote of Seawolf Ledge, describing it as a geological anomaly, a granite mass so dense and uniquely composed that it acted as a natural amplifier. It could capture the faintest whispers of the sea, focusing them like a giant ear pressed against the deep. He had discovered it during a Navy survey, and after his discharge, he had returned with his own savings. 5 years of labour, working alone, hollowing chambers into the stone, installing machines powered not by mainland electricity, but by tidal generators, he designed himself. He wrote of turbines hidden in a narrow channel, turning endlessly with the moon's pull, feeding batteries and regulators in a system designed to run for decades without human intervention. Michael set the book down for a moment, staring into the fire. The idea was breathtaking, an outpost powered by the sea itself, listening to the world beneath waves. Scout rested his head on Michael's knee. The Marine absently stroked the thick fur, his mind racing. His grandfather had not been mad. He had been a visionary. Further pages shifted from explanation to confession. Julian described his decision to hide the station, to bury his work inside the ledge itself. I do this not for empire, not for profit, but for the principle of the silent watch. I will listen. I will guard. I will not strike. Michael exhaled slowly. The phrase again. The silent watch. It was more than a metaphor. It was a mission. The last entries were written with urgency. Numbers, letters, grid coordinates, military cipher. And at the end, a crude drawing of the brass key, with an arrow indicating a twisting motion. Michael's training stirred awake. He recognized the code structure, a naval cipher he had once learned to break during specialized communications training. His fingers itched for pencil and paper, but first he looked at Scout. The dog's amber eyes glowed in the firelight. He wasn't just a pet. He was the sentinel Julian had left to deliver the mission. Michael whispered, "You knew. You've been waiting." Scout thumped his tail once against the floor. The night stretched long. Michael copied the cipher into a notebook, his hands steady with the precision of a man assembling a rifle. He decrypted line by line. The message unfolded, not as a direct map, but as riddles steeped in naval lore, where the sea breathes out and the stone sighs at the hour of the dog watch. Follow the Kraken's arms to the heart of the trident. He remembered Julian's earlier journals, references to kelp beds like tentacles, rock formations named with seafarers' imagination. The code pointed toward a formation on the far side of the ledge. The brass key was not just a symbol, it was a tool meant to open something hidden in the cliffs. At dawn, Michael stepped outside. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean. The horizon stretched wide, endless blue under rising sun. Scout trotted beside him, ears forward. Together they climbed the rocks to the western edge of the island. From there, Michael could see it. Long beds of kelp stretching through shallow water, curling toward a jagged three-pronged cliff. The trident. At high tide, it would be invisible, but now, with the sea receding, it revealed itself like the bones of some ancient beast. Scout stood tall at the edge, sniffing the wind, then looking back at Michael with sharp intent. The Marine's chest tightened. He knew that look. It was the same look in the eyes of a point man signaling, "This is the way." But Michael also knew patience. The code had specified a time, the dog watch, late afternoon, when the tide would fall lowest. That was when the entrance would reveal itself. He knelt, resting a hand on Scout's strong shoulder. "Not yet," he said softly. "We wait." They spent the day in a rhythm of labor and preparation. Michael checked his gear, flashlight, rope, a spare canteen, his knife, and the brass key wrapped carefully in cloth. He filled his pack with rations. Scout followed every move, as if he too understood they were preparing for a mission. At times, Michael caught himself drifting into memory. Desert patrols, briefing tents, nights when every sense screamed that something was coming. The difference was that now the enemy was unknown, and the only ally he had was a dog who somehow carried the will of his grandfather. But that was enough. Late afternoon arrived. The tide withdrew like a great exhale, exposing slick stone and seaweed. The sun burned low, casting molten gold across the waves. Michael and Scout descended the treacherous path toward the trident. Every step echoed with anticipation. Scout's posture was taut, purposeful. He moved not as a wanderer, but as a guide certain of his path. They reached the central prong of the cliff. A sheer granite wall loomed before them, draped in heavy curtains of seaweed. To an untrained eye, it was just another slab of rock. But Scout pressed forward, nose to the stone, sniffing, then pawing once at a particular spot waist high. Michael pushed aside the slimy fronds. His fingers traced the surface until they found it. A circular indentation, no bigger than a coin, etched with a gear-like pattern. His heart slammed in his chest. The grooves matched the notches on the brass key. He unwrapped the key with reverence. Its weight seemed heavier now, as if it carried not just brass, but destiny. Scout stood at his side, eyes locked on him, tail rigid. Michael inhaled deeply, then pressed the key into the indentation. It slid in perfectly, no resistance. He gripped the T-handle with both hands and turned clockwise. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the ground itself groaned. A vibration traveled through the rock, through Michael's boots, into his bones. A thin seam of light appeared, tracing a rectangle in the cliff face. With a deep grinding rumble, the entire section of stone began to move, receding inward. The seaweed fell away as the cliff opened like the door of a vault. Before them yawned a tunnel, black and absolute. Cold air flowed out, dry and sterile, carrying a faint scent of metal and dormant machinery. It was the opposite of the ocean. No salt, no life, only silence. Scout's ears twitched. He gave a low bark, sharp and commanding. Michael raised the flashlight. The beam pierced the black, revealing smooth walls that seemed to swallow the light. The tunnel stretched straight, ending in another heavy door. The Marine's training clicked into place. He slung his pack, tightened the straps, and glanced down at his companion. "On me," he said. Scout pressed close against his leg. Together they stepped into the darkness. The tunnel smelled like an old hospital, dry, sterile, no ocean allowed. Every footfall said we weren't descending. We were entering the island's chest. I wasn't hunting treasure. I was confirming the rock had a heartbeat. The silence inside was total. Their footsteps echoed metallic, swallowed by the tunnel's geometry. The air was unnervingly still. Michael kept the flashlight moving, sweeping walls and ceiling. Everything was precise, engineered, the work of a master craftsman. They reached the end, a naval-style bulkhead door complete with a circular wheel. Michael set down his pack, tested the wheel. It moved smoothly, as if freshly oiled despite decades of abandonment. He spun it, and with a hiss of equalized air, the door swung inward. The sight beyond stole his breath. A cavernous chamber carved directly from the granite, lit dimly by long dormant bulbs that flickered weakly to life as if awakened by their presence. Rows of consoles curved around a massive central screen. Banks of servers stood like silent sentinels, standby lights glowing faint green. Catwalks and staircases descended to lower levels. It was not a bunker, it was a station. Scout padded forward, his claws clicking on the metal floor. His nose twitched as he took in the sterile air. Then he sat, tail curling neatly, posture regal. A sentinel at home. Michael's throat constricted. His grandfather had built this, alone, hidden, waiting. He stepped forward, his boots ringing against the steel. His hand brushed across a console, dustless, untouched by time. On the main panel, a brass plaque gleamed. He wiped it clean with his sleeve and read the engraving. Use it to protect, not to profit. The watch is now yours. Orders, without rank. I brought the station up like an old instrument. Local grid, diagnostics, partial array, full spectrum. But somewhere past the trench, another hand was turning a different dial. Not to listen, to aim. The words blurred as his vision tightened. He felt the weight of years pressing down, not crushing, but crowning him. He looked at Scout, who gazed back with eyes steady as the sea. For the first time in a decade, Michael Croft did not feel adrift. He felt stationed. The silent watch had been passed to him, and the first mission was about to begin. In the margins, Julian had sketched an odd addition. Panel-mounted transducers tuned to the tunnel's shape. Not a weapon, he'd underlined. A wall of discomfort, enough to stop men without making ghosts. Michael traced the diagram and smiled without meaning to. The old man had built a way to defend a door without firing a shot. Part 4. Rising tension. The first thing Michael heard was the ocean breathing like an animal. Long, cavernous inhalations across the shoals, exhalations that rattled the steel bones of the station below Seawolf Ledge. On the main console, the ocean's heartbeat strobed across the curved display. Hushes of teal for an open shelf, bruised violets for the trench, jittery freckles of lime where shrimp beds crackled like dry electricity. Scout's reflection sat at the base of the glass, ears pricked, chest rising slow and steady, watchdog to a world of sound. The storm line on the horizon had thickened overnight. It no longer looked like weather, it looked like geometry. A hard, bruise-dark edge cut the sky, moving east with premeditated purpose. Wind climbed the cliff, and poured into Michael's jacket cuffs like cold water. He tugged the zipper to his chin and watched the barometric pressure fall on the tiny brass gauge his grandfather had mounted near the hatch. Julian Croft had loved instruments. He loved what they demanded: discipline, patience, the humility to listen. "We've got maybe 8 hours," Michael murmured, glancing at the falling needle. Scout tilted his head as if he could read the numbers too. On the acoustics panel, he refined the array's filters with a caution that bordered on reverence. The station was awake now. Power bled from the tidal regulators with the moon's pull. The batteries were topped. Cooling flowed through the server racks with a soft, sustained sigh. He'd brought it online in measured steps, just as the journal instructed: local grid, diagnostics, partial array, then full spectrum. Part 3 had been about wonder, learning the instrument. Part 4 would be about living with it. He marked 3 acoustic features with steady hands. 1. A cluster of merchant shipping lanes to the south, purple bands that pulsed with patient certainty. 2. The far-off chatter of a Navy destroyer drilling somewhere to the east. He recognized the cadence of her screws like a bar of music he'd once learned by heart. 3. And something new, out past the trench. A small, deliberate signature, holding at the edge of noise, masked by the storm's distant belly rumblings. The size and speed were wrong for Wales. It was too cold, too flat, too careful to be a wandering research skiff. He leaned closer. The signature barely admitted to its existence, a fingertip pressed into soft clay. If he looked too hard, it seemed to vanish. If he relaxed his eyes, the ocean gave it back. "Not today," Michael said to it. "Not with this weather." He set a geofence on the map, a thin, luminous ring around Seawolf Ledge. Anything crossing it would trigger a quiet chime and annotate a log. He copied the station's latest health report into an encrypted packet: battery reserves green, coolant nominal, vibration threshold within tolerances, and appended a short human sentence that Julian would have approved of. Listening, not hunting. Requesting friendly ears on this channel until the storm clears. Then he flashed the burst along a path that existed mostly in the old man's notes and in certain still listening rooms on the mainland. He didn't expect a reply. The point was to be known, not to be answered. "I lit a torch in heavy weather. If you're friendly, hear me." Torches don't choose who shows up. They just tell the dark where the door is. He checked the surface one last time before sealing the hatch. The sky had lost its blue to a dull pewter. The smell changed. More iron, less salt. Scout stepped to the lip of the cliff and stared west. For a second, he looked like the figure on an old national park poster. Resolute, ears high, carved from wind. Michael touched his shoulder. "Below," he said, and the shepherd followed him down into the throat of the rock. The needle dove. Wind poured into my sleeves like cold water. On the screen, inside the storm's roar, a heartbeat tried to pass for weather. Not wail, not friendly. The kind of quiet that means intent. By early afternoon, the station felt like a ship at sea. Wind loaded the cliff, and the cliff transferred the weight into the station's ribs in a slow, rolling cadence. Michael logged the impulses without thinking, the way a pilot logs the sound of an engine. That one's new. That one we've heard before. That one we don't like. The mass dampers, a genius afterthought in the margins of Julian's journal, kicked in with a low, resonant hum that steadied the consoles. On screen, the storm translated into pure colour, an incoming wall of orange and copper sweeping the continental shelf, long frequencies bellowing in the abyss like a choir 100 miles wide. Scout padded a slow circuit of the room, perimeter check, water bowl, a glance at the hatch, back to his place at the base of the console. Somewhere inside the young man part of Michael, a switch he didn't know he still had flipped on. The watch, the old discipline. It didn't feel like war this time. It felt clean, a job with edges. The radio cracked once, static unspooling into the room like frost melting off a wire. A voice followed, chopped into pieces by weather and distance. Copy. Seawolf Ledge acknowledged. Advise maintain passive posture. Cutter coverage degraded. Storm levels. We are listening. Keep your torch lit. Then it was gone, like a hand leaving his shoulder. He breathed easier anyway. It was almost comforting then to hear a different engine in his head, one he did not welcome, one he'd tried all week to ignore. That engine wore cologne and a grin. It had a watch more expensive than Michael's truck and spoke with a family certainty that didn't belong to him. Evan. The cousin's call had come 2 nights after the discovery, a number Michael didn't recognize lighting like a brief flare across the station's cheap, hand-me-down satellite phone. "Cuz," Evan said, voice bright as a lobby. "You made the papers." "Well, not the papers, but my papers. My phone's for emergencies," Michael said. He watched Scout's ears pivot toward the sound like parabolas. "This is family, and business, and frankly, national interest. People care about what Grandad sunk into that rock." Turns out the old man wasn't just eccentric, he was an investor in something big. "Drop it, Evan." "I'm trying to help," Evan said, and Michael could hear the smile across the wire. "You're going to need partners, insurance, legal structure. You're sitting on IP that could—" "We're not selling anything," Michael said. "We're not weaponizing it either." He built a listening post. That's what it will stay. Silence then, a beat where Evan's mask slid a half-inch. When he spoke again, the sales pitch had picked up an edge. "You don't own the future by squatting in the past, man. The world's moving. And the folks who keep the world's ship safe, they're willing to pay. I'm not talking villains in a smoky room. I'm talking real money with flags behind it." "Flags don't make a thing clean," Michael said. "My answer's no." "Okay." Evan laughed lightly. "Okay, you do you. But if you're going to do this, at least don't do it alone. Weather's turning. That ledge eats men in storms. I'll send a crew to help you batten down. Think of it as a family courtesy. I don't need—" The line went dead. He had looked at Scout then, at the dog's puzzled tilt, and felt the unwelcome memory of how fast a simple situation can spin into geometry, how quickly an offer becomes a lever. He logged the call, noted the time, the direction of the wind, the taste it left in his mouth. Now, as evening deepened and the first stubby shockwaves from the storm started pinging the array, another chime sounded, gentle and precise. The geofence. He looked up. A small surface craft had entered the ring from the east, a fast little thing skirting ahead of the worst of the weather, 30 feet of impatience wearing a radar profile like a disguise. No lights, no registered AIS, moving as if it had practiced the route a dozen times on a blue sky day, and wasn't impressed by the dark. "Scout," Michael said in a tone that meant on me. The dog was already at his knee. He switched a narrow band beam to visual. Spray strobed white as the bow knifed through it. 2 figures in foul weather gear, one built like a refrigerator, one compact, jittery. Between them, a shape he didn't need the scope to recognize. Evan wore a parka with a brand name across the chest, and a look that said this was a champagne story he'd already practiced telling. They were angling for the lee of the ledge, the tiny notch of harbour, where Julian had taught the old diesel to purr and sleep. In this weather, docking there was bravery or stupidity. Sometimes they were the same. "Not today," Michael said again, to the boat, to the storm, to himself. He killed the overheads and left the consoles glowing. He didn't turn off the array, never turn off the instrument, but he hardened the station's posture, sealed the inner hatches, set the ventilation to storm mode, reduced the non-critical drawers that made warm pockets in the wiring harness. He folded Julian's laminated startup card back into its place on the console, and then he looked at Scout. "This is going to be noisy," he said. "Shelter's complicated. Let a man in, out of a storm, and you save his life. Let the wrong one in, and you spend the night paying for it." A heavy hand banged on the granite door 20 minutes later. 3 enormous knocks that travelled through the stone, like a mallet striking a bell. It wasn't the subtle, polite rhythm of a thing that knew what it was touching. It was the confidence of a man throwing weight before words. "Family!" Evan shouted down the tunnel. The word warped by the curve of the passage and the storm's throat. "You planning to let us in out of this mess, Michael?" The rational part of Michael's mind took the con, as it had in rooms and alleys across oceans. The station can withstand the storm. 3 men with wet boots can't. The human part of him, the part that loved the clean math of duty, hated that the right move was also the dangerous one. 3 knocks boomed through the stone like a bell. Family seeking shelter in a storm. But I've learned. What walks in after the rain isn't always dry. He spun the wheel and cracked the door. Wind came in head first, bringing needles of brine and a taste like iron filings. Evan's smile arrived before the rest of him. "Hell of a man cave," Evan said, wiping his brow theatrically, though his hair was already plastered to his head. "You going to frisk us too?" "I'm going to save your life," Michael said. "Get inside." The big man came first without waiting for permission. He had a neck like a piling and the careful look of someone who understood rooms. The wiry one blinked past with a speed that set Scout's hackles up. Evan paused on the threshold and looked down the tunnel like he'd stepped into a myth. "Julian was a stubborn old cuss," he said, awed despite himself. "I'll give him this. He had taste." Michael sealed the door behind them, and the storm's voice dropped from a scream to a growl. You can measure the weight of wind by the pitch of a hatch. They walked into the main chamber like tourists into a cathedral, necks tilting, feet unconsciously soft. The curved screen, dimmed but not asleep, painted their faces with the sea's aurora. Purple lanes, green dust, copper wall, the small, careful bruise out past the trench. Evan reached for the console before he thought, and then pulled his hand back like a boy in a museum. "What is this worth?" he asked softly, greed and awe wrestling in his throat. "It's worth not losing ships you don't have to lose," Michael said. "It's worth hearing whales talk to each other across a canyon. It's worth keeping quiet, mostly." "Mostly," Evan repeated, trying the word like a coat he might purchase. "Bathrooms down that corridor," Michael said to the men he didn't know. "Dry blankets in the locker by the galley. Sit, get warm. Nobody touches anything orange. That's all power. Tell me if you feel dizzy or if your ears start to pound." The big man nodded, a professional assent, and the wiry one gave a thumbs up with too many teeth. Evan did not move. He planted himself beside the console where the station rendered the storm like stained glass and watched the edges of Michael's mouth for tells. "You pinged someone," Evan said. "I can smell it. That friendly ears line your little note to the world. That's sweet and naive. You think this can stay local. You think you can keep a thing like this from becoming a thing. We can try," Michael said. "Try has a price," Evan said. "You going to pay it alone?" "As many days as I'm given." Michael's voice surprised him with how steady it was. And I'm not alone. At his heel, Scout lifted his chin and breathed. Evan laughed like a man at a cocktail party telling a story he truly loves. Oh, that's good. That's very good. That plays. But you're not getting it. There are buyers, respectable ones, parked outside the storm line right now. They don't want your rock. They want what your rock hears. I don't need you to sell your soul. I just need you to lease your ears. They walk away with signatures. You get paid. America gets safer. Everybody wins. On the screen, the bruise at the edge of the trench took a breath and moved a yard closer. We're not hunters, Michael said. We're watchmen. And when the thing you're watching crawls onto your porch, Evan asked too fast, like he had this beat prepped. When it comes wrapped in a flag you don't like. When it points itself at a ship with teenagers on it. You going to keep listening while it eats? Or you going to let someone with a bigger stick leverage your ears into eyes and your eyes into aim? Michael looked at the bruise. It had a patience he recognized from different battles, a willingness to lose hours in exchange for inches. I'll call it out, he said. I'll call it twice. I'll put a light on it until someone with a badge gets here. I'll keep the room warm and the power on. The rest is not my job. Everything you keep saying feels like a nice way to say no, Evan said. It is. Evan exhaled like a man finishing a set at the gym. Okay, then let's play this another way. You keep your little shrine, you keep your dog and your Boy Scout oath, but we build a service layer, a wrapper, a cooperative interface. Just a little box, just a few ports, just a feed. I'll put it this way. If you don't sell this to the right people, the wrong people will take it. And they won't bring blankets. Before Michael could answer, Scout moved. Just a half step, just enough to pull Michael's eyes to the hatch. The geofence chimed again. Another surface blip, smaller than Evan's rental, slid into the ring from the west, edges soft, profile underfed, the acoustic equivalent of a man who doesn't belong in a tux. It wasn't fast, it was careful. It took a path the array would mistake for wave noise, almost did, until the storm's frequency shifted and simple physics betrayed it. Friends of yours? Michael asked without looking away from the glass. Evan didn't answer. Michael drew the blob into a box and told the computer to hold it there. Enhanced, labelled, time-stamped. You brought company into a storm? My crew, Evan said, a little too quick. Safety. You already have two, Michael said, nodding at the big one and the small one. What's the third boat for? For you, Evan said, for options. On screen, the bruise in the trench seemed to take interest. It adjusted its weight like a cat on a fence. The storm deepened, and the station's ribs replied with a sympathetic hum. Michael felt the sound in his molars. He stepped toward the galley and returned with a thermos of black coffee and 3 enamel mugs, because men tend to tell you more when they're holding warm things. He poured for the 2 hired hands. He left Evan's cup empty. Rook, the big man said, thanking him with his eyes. Finn, the wiry one said, fingers already tapping the mug, as if it were an instrument he might play. They looked at the dog, then at the door, then at the curve of the screen, like men in a museum who can't quite stand the art. You set any landlines? Rook asked softly, as if this were a visiting team locker room and he'd spotted something in the tape. Just ears, Michael said. Good, Rook said, and looked relieved in a way that told Michael he'd rather be a bodyguard than a thief. Something changed in the air then, a pressure drop like an elevator leaving a floor. The station's dampers woke a notch further. The coolant line ticked twice like ice in a glass. On screen, the storm's copper wall arrived, solid now, filling the ocean like a myth. The bruise at the trench put its shoulder into the flow and let the weather hide it. The radio spit snow. Cutter. Negative. The rest of the sentence dissolved. Scout's growl started low. It wasn't for the wind. It wasn't for Evan. It was for something older. The very bolts in the station seemed to lean toward the sound, as if the animal voice had found a frequency in the steel. Michael set the coffee down. "Everybody listen," he said, and the room did. Beneath the storm's roar, under the low organ note of a continental shelf flexing, beneath the freight train rush of waves slamming ledge, something smaller ticked. Not a clock tick, not a metronome, something like a spoon tapping a teacup from 3 rooms away. 3 taps, then a pause. 3 more, slightly closer. A pause. 3 more. There. He pulled a filter from a shelf, one Julian had labelled, "Mine the music from the mud." He dragged it across the input with the care of a barber's blade. Noise fell away. The taps stepped forward. Acoustic ranging. He said to no one and to everyone, "Somebody's painting the rock." "Which somebody?" Evan asked. His bravado was suddenly all elbows. "The kind that doesn't fly a flag where you can see it," Michael said. He touched the array's gain gently, the way you touch a sleeping child. The blob at the trench answered the touch like muscle flexing under cloth. It was closer now and bolder, surfing the storm's low swell. The small craft to the west, Evan's options, eased nearer too, pretending to be drift. Outside, the first hard snow hit Seawolf Ledge like a bucket of nails. The hatch moaned. Somewhere behind the walls, a battery relay clicked like a knuckle cracking, and the lights dimmed a fraction. On the console, a red line woke in the corner of the power display and then politely fell back asleep when the regulators caught up. Rook set down his mug. "Boss," he said to Evan, low. "We're not the only ones who came to shop." Evan forced a smile so thin it was almost honest. "All the more reason to do the deal now." "No deal," Michael said. He wasn't a shouter. He didn't need to be. "You brought strangers to my door in a storm. You're going to sit on that bench. You're going to drink your coffee. When this blows through, your boat will take you back the way you came. Until then, you'll enjoy the privilege of being alive." Finn shifted, shoulders coiling. Scout rose an inch and showed his teeth like punctuation marks. The second hand on the analog clock over the galley counted a patient circle. The station breathed. The storm answered. Something bumped the rock with a sound like a giant shoulder testing a locked door. "Okay," Evans said at last, palms up. "Okay, we're guests. But guests get to ask questions." "You'll get answers when they're safe," Michael said. "Safe," Evan repeated, trying the word again. He lifted his empty mug, feigned surprise, and set it down with a clink that sounded louder than it was. Then he walked to the console and leaned an inch too close to the glass, fogging the ocean with his breath, and said softly, "Torch is lit, cuz. Lot of things can see it." On the far right of the curve, at the edge of where the array could still say, "I know this," without lying, a narrow line flickered. Not the bruise, not the drifting boat. Another signature, thinner, higher in pitch, cutting across the grain like a needle. It wasn't moving toward the ledge. It was moving across its face, as if measuring the cliff with a laser none of them could see. Julian had scribbled a note in a margin once. "The sea remembers. The stone keeps score. If they drum on the wall will hum back." Michael reached without looking and laid his palm flat on the steel of the console. The hum came up through his fingers, through his wrist, into the places scars grow. He felt, more than heard, Scouties closer until the dog's shoulder touched his shin. He heard Rook's breath find a speed he trusted, and Finn's foot begin to tap and stop tapping when the animal's eyes met his. He saw Evans swallow something that did not look like greed. The station exhaled. The storm answered with a roar that swallowed the room and then gave it back. Somewhere miles out and 100 feet down, unseen hands tapped a teacup 3 times and waited. Michael turned down the room lights a notch and raised the ocean a hair, as if asking a child to speak louder at dinner. When he spoke, he didn't look at Evan. "Welcome to the watch," he said. "You want to know what this place is worth? Tonight, you'll see the bill." They tapped 3 times on the wall. The sea answered 3 times under our feet. Our job isn't to shout them down. It's to raise a light so both sides have to look. The storm hammered the ledge like a blacksmith at an anvil. On the array, the ocean's chaos ran green and gold, but one shape refused to blur, a compact submersible riding the trench, patient as a shark. A smaller contact pinched off its side and rose. Diver pod. They birthed a capsule from the larger shadow and let it climb like a bubble. That isn't research. It's appetite. To steal the instrument, you break the hands that keep time. Michael's fingers moved without hurry. "They're not sightseeing," he said. Scout's growl threaded the steel floor. External sensors flared. Magnetic clamps. Thermal cutters kissing stone on the north service hatch. "Positions," Michael said. He slid a pistol to Rook, a shotgun to Finn, and met Evan's eyes just, long enough to mean stay out of the way. He whistled once. Scout flowed to heel, every muscle wired for the dark. The sonar display flickered in the chamber, casting ghostly green light across their faces. Michael glanced at it and felt the blood drain from his cheeks. The large submersible outside had launched another pod. This one bigger, heavier. A mechanical icon marked it as armored. "They're not just here for tech," Michael whispered. "They're here to claim the entire station." Scout whined softly, pressing against his leg. The storm above groaned like an angry god, the weight of the sea bearing down on the fragile sanctuary. Evan rose from his crouch, his voice trembling. Maybe if we surrender, they'll spare us. They don't need to kill us if they get what they want." Michael stepped forward, his voice low but lethal. "You don't negotiate with vultures. You survive them." Another thunderous explosion shook the station, louder than before. Dust rained from the ceiling. One of the doors warped under the pressure, steel groaning, bolts snapping. Scout barked furiously, his body rigid. Rook raised his weapon, jaw tight. Finn whimpered, clutching the shotgun like a lifeline. The groaning steel split with a screech. A crack of light appeared in the door as hydraulic tools on the other side forced it open inch by inch. Michael steadied his weapon, his breathing even. Scout crouched, teeth bared, waiting for his command. The cutter's pitch climbed to a needle and then stuttered. The wheel twitched, but the door didn't give. Someone cursed on the far side in a language that didn't belong to this coast. The storm hit the ledge like a dropped anvil. Dust trickled from the steel. Michael didn't blink. "They'll try another seam," he said. Scout's growl settled into his bones. The station held its breath, then chose to keep it. Not a breach. Not yet. The kind of knock that tests a hinge and memorizes the echo. The room washed red. External access. Detected pulsed across the glass. Pressure test at the main hatch. Holding. Michael flipped up the orange dust cover on a brass rotary Julian had etched with one word. Deter. He didn't turn it yet. "Position stay as briefed," he said. Scout settled at heel, eyes hard on the hatch. Rook rolled his shoulders once. Finn's boot tapped and went still when the shepherd looked his way. Outside, the trench shadow idled like a cat, letting the storm hide its intentions. Inside, the array's diagnostics began to misbehave. Tiny latency spikes, A jitter in the cooling curve. They're not just cutting, Michael murmured. They're probing the system. He slid to a secondary console and locked out remote control across the power tree. A string of green checks answered. Locals only. A new tone bled in, thin, dental, needling the bones of the room. Somewhere inside the walls, screws sang in sympathy. Too clean for weather, too human for chance. Finn flinched. What is that? Active pings off our stone. Acoustic ranging Michael opened Julian's drawer, found a plastic sleeve labelled in the old man's hand. Mud filter. Take the music out of the noise. He feathered it onto the input. The storm stepped back a pace. The tap stepped forward. 3, pause. 3, closer. 3, there. Sparks kissed the outer door. A cutter sang high. Then higher. Michael let it run 30 seconds, then thumbed a guarded toggle. A throat-deep hum grew in the tunnel, the panel-mounted transducers Julian had sketched in the margins. Not a weapon, the old man had written. A wall of discomfort. The cutter's tone wobbled. Someone on the far side swore in a language that didn't belong to this coast. The wheel stopped turning. Not today, Michael said, mostly to Scout. Evan couldn't leave silence alone. You think non-lethal toys will hold professionals? You need a deal, not a door. You invited them, Michael said without turning. You don't get to set doctrine. The geofence chimed again. A second blip crept along the west wall of the ring. A skiff riding the lee, pretending to be spray and wind. Michael tagged it. Drift 2. On the main glass, the trench bruise shifted its weight. Still patient, now interested. The radio cracked and gave him half a sentence in a male voice. Cut a divert. Storm priority. Keep your torch lit. Then, the weather ate the rest. Michael sent a short burst on Julian's old path. Passive. Holding. Non-lethal deterrence active. Noise cover heavy. The next assault came sideways. Lights flickered. The station's hum hiccuped. Not a blade. An override attempt. Dirty voltage pushed at the regulators, trying to trip them into a brownout. Michael locked a jaw on the grid. Manual mode. Governor deadband narrowed. Non-critical drawers dumped. The room dimmed one stop. The batteries answered with a steadying green. Somewhere in the walls, a relay clicked like a knuckle cracking. The hum smoothed. Talk to me, Rook said quietly. They're trying to make us deaf, Michael said. Storm does the cover. A short power sag does the rest. Then they come. He pulled a foam-lined case from under the console. 4 palm-sized pucks labelled TIDEEAR in Julian's tidy print. He tossed one to Rook and one to Finn. Clamp them to the secondary handrails in the service stair. It'll give me a clean side channel if they try to blind the main array. One on the lower landing, one halfway. Rook nodded and moved. Finn hesitated until Scout gave him a single surgical bark. Then he ran. The cutters returned, but not at the main hatch. The sound moved, left, then lower, searching for thinner steel. Michael opened a sectional map. Secondary maintenance door, lower east. They want a soft panel and short haul. He thumbed DETA to level 1. The tunnel groaned with sound too low to name. It wasn't volume that hurt. It was geometry, the way waves met in the carved stone throat. A minute later, the torches faltered and slid away like men losing their nerve. Silence, not peace, tactic. Michael used it. He pulled Scout with him to the lower corridor, moving quick and quiet. On the landing, the shepherd froze, ears forward, head angled. Michael stilled beside him and felt it a beat later. A pressure change, a cold breath through a seam. He wiped frost from a knee-high panel and found a hairline newer than the rest. A service hatch within the service hall. Clever. He set his palm to it and fell to tremor. Someone testing from the far side. He backed a pace, set a flashbang on the floor, pin-pulled and spoon-pinned under his thumb. "If it pops," he whispered to Scout, "we're back up the stairs." The dog's gaze never left the panel. The pressure eased. The tremor faded. Far away, the primary cutters started again and died against the hum in the throat. Hours compressed and stretched. The storm punched and withdrew. They played chess in pressure and sound. Twice more the power wavered. Twice Michael steadied it by hand. Twice more the cutters searched new seams. Twice the DTO wall made professionals decide their stomachs hurt enough for now. Evan wore a track in the floor. Rook returned, damp and watchful. Finn learned to breathe through fear. On the glass, the trench bruise slid a mile closer and stopped. The west skiff drifted to where a fisherman would never choose to be. Michael tagged another faint scatter, a ladder of bubbles rising from mid-depth like pearls. "Diver pod," he said. "They're tired of doors." "Can they swim in?" Finn asked. "Not without a map," Michael said, "and not without telling us." Scout's head snapped toward the lower hall before the sensors did. Michael felt the dog's body change, a coil answering a signal only dogs hear. He moved 3 steps and heard it too. Not a cutter, not a footstep, a tap. Metal on metal, deliberate, counting inches on the far side of the stone. He rolled a sonic puck down the hall. It clicked alive and began to sing a note that folded the corridor in on itself. The tapping stopped. The radio gave him another shard. "Boarding team, window, 20, hold, passive." Weather chewed the rest. 20 minutes could be a century. 10, 15, 20 minutes. Combat stretches time like wire. I don't have to win, I have to hold. The doors, the power, the room, and the dog. So he doesn't spend his last charge on my mistake. "Time check?" Rook asked. "Enough to do one stupid thing right," Michael said. He turned deter to level 2 for 30 seconds, long enough to make the tunnels feel like a pressure chamber, short enough not to cook their own bearings. He counted down in his head and clicked it back to 1. A far-off body dropped something metal. Footsteps retreated. Evan sagged against the bulkhead. "You can't keep this up." "I only need to keep it up until a better class of intruder arrives," Michael said. The station shivered, not from sound but from the sea itself. A set of waves hit the ledge just wrong and made the rock ring like a struck bell. On the glass, the bruise in the trench rolled once more, then held, close enough now that the array showed a hint of screws hidden under weather. Scout pressed his shoulder to Michael's leg without taking his eyes off the dark. A whisper on the radio, clearer this time, command voice riding the wind like a spear. "Seawolf Ledge. This is Cutter Harriet Lane. Friendly team inbound. Hold your posture. Keep your torch lit. 10 minutes you can feel a rescue by how steel relaxes. Not safety, just a better class of danger. Last round, then the risk that carries this watch becomes plural." Michael exhaled for the first time in an hour. "Copy," he said to no one, and to the dog, and to the old man whose hands still lived in the machines. The cutters found courage for one more song. The lower hatch glowed, buckling at a corner where time had thinned it. Michael holstered his pistol, laid his fingers on deter, and nodded once to Scout. "Last round," he said. "Then we hand it off." Scout's tail thumped once, the whole answer he needed. He turned the knob. The tunnel sang. The storm answered. And somewhere in the spray and steel above, rotor blades began to thicken the air. The storm hadn't ended. It had learned their names. The tunnels held a bruised hush, aftershocks of sound still shivering in the ribs, while outside, the Atlantic threw its weight at the granite like a debt collector. Scout stood stone still at Michael's side, ears cutting the air. eyes fixed on the bulkhead that had refused men for an hour. A new sound crept in beneath the hum, steel complaining in a voice that meant business, not testing. The lower hatch on the east buckled at the corner they'd worried about, glowing faintly where torches had kissed it again and again. On the glass, the trench bruise squared to the ledge, and a second, cleaner signature slid into position above it. Not drift, not thieves, a team. Michael touched Scout's shoulder. "Now we hold," he said, and the shepherd's tail tapped once, like a signature. The heavy steel door that sealed the main chamber groaned. Sparks flew as cutting torches bit into the reinforced frame. The invaders were well equipped, methodical, and unafraid. Michael's mind ticked into focus. No panic, no hesitation. He had been trained for moments like this, but never with stakes like these. This was not a mission he could walk away from. This was legacy, blood, and the loyalty of a dog who would not abandon him. "Scout," he whispered, kneeling briefly, pressing his forehead to the shepherd's. The dog's amber eyes gleamed in the low light. He gave a single, resolute thump of his tail. Orders understood. Michael rose. "Rook, Finn, you want to live? You fight with me. Otherwise, when they come through that door, you're already dead." The two exchanged a glance. For once, bravado didn't answer. Survival did. Finn licked his lips nervously. What? What do we do?" Michael pulled open a weapons locker his grandfather had concealed behind a panel. Inside were old but well-maintained naval-issue rifles, ammunition, and flashbang grenades. "You hold the high walkways. Suppression fire when they breach. Don't think. Just keep them pinned." Rook grunted, his massive hands closing around a rifle like it was an extension of himself. Finn fumbled but nodded, swallowing his fear. "And Evan?" Michael turned his cold blue gaze on his cousin. "You caused this. Stay out of the way, or I won't waste my time saving you when it starts." Evan opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he seemed utterly speechless. The torch sparks stopped. Silence pressed for a single heartbeat. Then the slab of steel gave way with a groan that reverberated through the chamber. Smoke and sparks cascaded inward. Figures moved in the breach, black-clad, masked, weapons raised. "Contact!" Michael roared, his voice a thunderclap. Gunfire erupted. The chamber became a storm of flashes and echoes, bullets sparking against metal. Scout launched forward, his body a grey-white missile of fury. He struck the first intruder square in the chest, knocking the man backward into the dark. Snarls, shouts, and chaos filled the air. Michael moved with lethal efficiency. Controlled bursts, disciplined aim. One invader dropped, another staggered back, clutching a wound. Rook bellowed like an animal, firing wild but heavy shots that forced the intruders to duck. Finn, shaking, still managed to squeeze off rounds that whined into the breach, buying precious seconds. Scout darted back to Michael's side, muzzle flecked, eyes blazing, then leapt again at another soldier who tried to flank. His jaws closed on the man's arm, dragging him screaming to the floor. But the enemy was disciplined. They regrouped, pushing forward in formation. They weren't raiders. They were professionals, maybe mercenaries, maybe something worse. And they wanted the Silent Watch alive. Michael's mind raced. He couldn't hold them forever. The station had more than one entrance. If they got to the acoustic array, if they captured his grandfather's work, it would all be lost. "Fall back!" he shouted. "Control room now!" They moved, Scout covering, growling low and furious. Rook and Finn laid down fire as Michael keyed a command into the console. A steel bulkhead slammed down across the chamber, sealing the main entrance behind them. For the moment, they had bought time, but time was thin. In the control room, the massive curved screen still glowed. The sonar symphony had shifted. Amid the fading chaos of the storm, the submarine signature had drawn nearer. Close. Too close. And now, alongside it, another contact. Larger. Faster. A Coast Guard cutter. Michael's heart slammed against his ribs. Help. But would it come in time? The invaders pounded against the bulkhead. Explosives boomed. The metal shuddered, but held. For now, Scout stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his gaze fixed on Michael as if awaiting the next command. In those eyes, Michael saw not just loyalty, but expectation. The dog would follow him anywhere, even into death. He turned to the others. We hold them until the Coast Guard arrives. That's it. That's the mission. Evan's voice cracked. They'll kill us all. You can't fight them. Give them what they want. Michael's fury finally boiled over. He grabbed his cousin by the collar, slamming him against the console. What they want is to turn this into a weapon. To destroy everything our grandfather built. You sold us out for money, Evan. You made this war come to our doorstep. And if you can't understand why I won't let them win, then stay silent and pray we survive. Evan cowered, eyes wide. For once, he offered no argument. The pounding grew louder. Another explosion. The bulkhead warped. Michael turned back to the screen, fingers flying across controls. He rerouted power, activating subsystems long dormant. Along the walls of the chamber, hidden panels opened, revealing defense mechanisms, non-lethal sonic emitters, designed not for war, but for deterrence. Julian Croft had not been a soldier when he built this place. He had been an engineer who believed in protection, not destruction. Scout, Michael whispered, pulling the dog close. Let's finish his watch. The bulkhead gave way. Darkness poured in, figures rushing forward, shouts, gunfire. And then the station itself seemed to awaken. The sonic emitters screamed to life, filling the tunnel with a resonant, bone-shaking vibration. The intruders staggered, clutching their helmets, their formation collapsing in an instant. Scout lunged into the chaos, fearless, seizing one man's leg and dragging him down. Michael pressed the advantage, firing controlled bursts, pushing them back step by step. Rook roared, Finn screamed, but they fought, the desperate fury of cornered men. Above, the sonar display shifted again. The Coast Guard cutter was here, its signal merged with smaller, faster signatures. Coast Guard boarding teams deploying, approaching the ledge. Reinforcements, and then silence. The invaders broke, retreating, dragging their wounded, disappearing into the tunnels they had cut. A final echo of boots on metal faded, swallowed by the hum of the station. Michael stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, sweat and smoke clinging to his skin. Scout returned to his side, muzzle wet, eyes burning with fierce triumph. They had held. The siege blinked. The storm didn't. When the granite door slid and friendly boots took the room, I understood. Watches don't end. They change wrists. For now, my name stays on the board. Moments later, the granite door above ground slid open. Armed Coast Guardsmen flooded in, weapons ready, their discipline a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded them. At their head, Commander Hayes strode forward, his weathered face set in grim lines. He took in the scene, the wreckage, the weapons, the exhausted survivors, and then his gaze settled on Michael. You held, Hayes said quietly. A statement, not a question. Michael nodded. We did. But they'll come again. The commander's eyes softened as they fell to Scout, who stood proud despite his bloodied coat. Not today. Today, you bought us time, and you proved your grandfather was right to trust you. Evan tried to speak, but two coastguardsmen seized him by the arms, dragging him away. His protests rang hollow, meaningless. His greed had burned itself out. Rook and Finn, battered and wide-eyed, slumped against the wall. Survivors, nothing more. Hayes placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. You understand what this place is now, what it means. We'll repair, we'll reinforce. But we need a guardian, a man who knows what it is to keep the silent watch. Michael met his gaze, then looked down at Scout. The dog's eyes shone back, unwavering. He nodded. I'll do it. We'll do it. The commander's weathered face broke into a rare smile. Then it settled. Months passed. The storms of winter gave way to the slow thaw of spring. Seawolf Ledge, once a crumbling ruin, had been transformed. The shack was gone, replaced by a reinforced observation post. The tunnels had been repaired, the station fortified. But its heart remained the same, the great acoustic array, listening endlessly to the songs of the ocean. Michael stood on the cliff one evening, Scout at his side. The horizon blazed with sunset, the sky painted in gold and fire. The sea stretched infinite and eternal before them. For the first time in years, Michael felt peace. Not the silence of isolation, but the quiet strength of purpose. His ghosts were still with him, but they no longer ruled him. They had been replaced by something greater, a mission, a legacy. Scout pressed against his leg, tail swishing once. The shepherd's gaze followed the horizon, as though he too understood the weight of what they guarded. This is home now, Michael said softly. Yours and mine. Winter thaws. The rock keeps its weight. The sea keeps talking. This place didn't become a fortress. It became a promise. When Scout lifts his muzzle and sings at the horizon, the silence here finally answers back. And the watch holds. Scout lifted his head and howled once, a long, proud call that carried across the sea. It was not a sound of sorrow, but of defiance, of loyalty, of triumph. Not because of technology, or walls of granite, or weapons, but because of loyalty, because of family, because of a bond between man and dog that no storm, no greed, no enemy could ever break. The watch was theirs, and they would never abandon it.